This is the story of an expedition, just an ordinary expedition, in which 7 men try to navigate 3 rubber boats nearly 1,500 miles across British Columbia. Except no expedition is ever ordinary, and in the 9 weeks it will take, these 7 men will learn more about themselves than is comfortable, and more about each other than is flattering. They will find it is easier to travel hopefully than it is to arrive, that it is easier to travel than to travel hopefully, and that sometimes it is very, very difficult to travel at all. It will become an expedition of self-discovery, a test of leading and being led, and occasionally of sheer survival. The expedition's leader in the larger silver boat is Captain Sir Ranulph Fiennes, Baronet. Former regular soldier and professional explorer, he has already led an expedition up the White Nile and been down a Norwegian glacier. He is the best equipped to survive. In the same boat, Corporal Stanley Cribbett from Devon, expedition mechanic and medical orderly, an endless and willing worker. He is the most innocent, and this may be his strength. In the second and smaller boat, 2 Scottish soldiers, Corporal Joe Skibinski, athlete, skier, and expert canoeist, whose strength may even be his weakness. And young trooper Jackie McConnell, age 21, with a wife and baby back home in Edinburgh. Very keen, but very young. And with a fear of deep water he is determined to master. And running the film boat, Police Constable Ben Usher from Bridlington, Yorkshire, lifeboatman and lifesaver. Come to stop the film team from drowning themselves in the over-enthusiastic pursuit of perfect pictures. His motto, to save life, not risk it. These the people, and this the journey they must go. Nearly 1,500 miles by river across British Columbia, the first trans-navigation of the province from north to south. The first stage is a 200-mile push up the narrowing, rising Rocky Mountain Trench. Then comes a 90-mile portage over the Sifton Pass. Stage 3, a 400-mile-long chain of lakes and rivers. And then the last stage, 700 miles down the River Fraser, through vast canyons and raging rapids, including the famous Hell's Gate Rapid, to Journey's End beyond Vancouver. This team has already been on a 4-week training expedition on a smaller river. Time to get used to the boats, and more than used to the army rations, mainly dehydrated emergency packs for reasons of weight. A 24-hour pack, biscuits sweet and biscuits plain, a packet of soup and a packet of stew, a block of oatmeal and an ounce tube of jam, 2 ounces of condensed milk and 1½ ounces of cheese, an ounce of margarine, tea bags and toilet paper, spangles and salt, and 2 little sugar. Scientifically sufficient for 24 hours. But if an army marches on its belly, then it doesn't give a man much stomach for the dangers ahead. The first conflict, whether to use oars or engines. Captain Fiennes said oars.
Right, Jack, the best way to run this is probably on the left-hand side here, as you can see. But it's really up to you when you get to the individual crests and see how bad they are from close by.
Ben Usher.
I was appalled that my advice to use the motors had been rejected by Ram. I would have thought that anybody without any experience of these boats would be only too willing to take advice from somebody who had experience. The only thing I could do was to stand by in a position where I could give help if necessary.
The lifeboatman's expertise, the leader's reasons.
But you could see for yourself that there were nothing but rocks all the way through that rapid. And when you've got an outboard engine and you think you are going to overturn, you worry about being in the water with a propeller which is going round very fast and would mince you very bloodily in no time at all if you got near it.
Captain Sir Ranulph Fiennes at the oars, Corporal Stanley Cribbett steering with a paddle, the expedition heads into the Cranberry Rapid, a rapid that has already drowned a long list of the unwary and the over-adventurous. The run made, Captain Fiennes reconsiders his views in the oars versus engine controversy.
It might have been misplaced faith in oars at that stage. Having been through it, I would never want to use oars again.
Now the turn of the smaller boat with the two Scots to paddle through. Aboard, young trooper Jackie McConnell with his fear of deep water. A weak swimmer too, only able, as he put it, to do the doggy paddle. The capsized boat, the swimmer's best hope. Corporal Joe Skibinski.
Without the buoyancy of the craft to keep us up, we'd probably been dragged under by a few waves and roughed up on a few rocks.
Jackie.
Just to keep a hold of the boat. That is in your mind all the time. And then sort of brought to our senses, we ran shouting from the shore, "It's engine all right," the first thing he shouted.
I think the silver boat's had it. I think we should give it a decent burial.
The Undertaker's not with us at the moment.
We'll probably need him before we get to Vancouver.
The price of Cranberry. One ripped boat, one swamped engine, and one man with a renewed fear of deep water to haunt him. But the next stage is into shallower water, upstream against the current, and calling for every gallon of petrol the boats can carry. It's a complicated stage too, involving changes of craft and additions to the crew. The first newcomer, Captain Fiennes' wife, Lady Virginia Fiennes. Her usual job, to run the backup and supply operation on land. But now she will travel upstream, and when the river becomes too shallow and the expedition presses on in canoes, she will bring the big boats back downstream. Helping her, Corporal Wally Wallace, an irrepressible Liverpudlian, who sadly had to leave the expedition early. The expedition had expected the fight upstream to be tough, but it proved even tougher than they thought. Joe Skibinski.
The boats were very heavily laden, and the bows were digging into the waves and starting to go down instead of coming up. And in fact, we needed assistance from another boat to help pull us out.
The lifeboatman Ben to the rescue. Full power, the heavy-laden boats started to drive under in the rapids. At reduced power, the current often held them stationary. They tried towing. They tried redistributing weight, but still the expedition made little headway. The river, running at twice the speed they had expected, was winning. Captain Fiennes.
We've done about 12 miles to this point, this large bend here. We've averaged about 3.5 miles an hour, using 5 gallons an hour, and at that rate, which is just over double what we expected, we certainly won't make it or anything like it. So we'll just have to change the schedule completely and send some of you back again. So Wally and Jenny in the Seacraft, taking as much of your personal kit and any accessories as you can, get back down. You probably make it by tonight. We'll carry on in the 2 RFD boats. That way we might just make the remaining 95 miles.
Morale drooped. Corporal Cribbett.
I felt rather sick over it, actually, because until then we'd all been together, and for somebody to go back, it was sort of disheartening.
The beginning of the breakup. Already the expedition was under strain. Both physically and mentally, the explorers were beginning to feel the strength of the wilderness they had challenged. And there was still 100 miles of river, rising up, ever up into the Rocky Mountain Trench. Before this, the first and easiest stage would be completed. Captain Fiennes.
I thought the trip up the Kachika was extremely cold and wet and miserable. The freezing rain which really drummed down on the boats, and there was no escape from it. It was very cold. There was already snow in the Rockies, although it was late August, and I thought it was a very miserable part of the expedition.
And to complete the discomfort, the brave orange anoraks were far from waterproof. Then there were the log jams, exerting a magnetic attraction for one of the boats, to the growing exasperation and worry of lifesaver Ben Usher.
There was just no need to go into these log jams. The obvious thing is to take evasive action and to move across, out of the way. But they just went ploughing straight into them, and I couldn't understand it. It was just damn right stupid.
The river was definitely against us. We were striking shallows, and finally when we reached the mountain called Terminus Mountain, the most northerly mountain of the Rocky Mountains, we finally realized we couldn't go any further in the rubber boats, and we would have to get into our portable canoes.
Earlier in Britain, the film team had planned to follow the river too, and then trek over the Sifton Pass carrying 50-pound packs. Ben Usher again.
We were told that the Sifton Pass would be 10 to 12 miles long before we left England, but in fact when we did arrive we found that it was between 80 and 90 miles across, and the packs would be 100 pounds plus, which really is out of the question. No man should be asked to carry anything like that.
Captain Fiennes supervises the army team's final preparations for the attempt.
Rations-wise, we've got to have 10 days rations on board, and there's 4 of us, so that's 40 rations. You're not meant to have them for more than 6 days without having a good meal afterwards. But I suppose we'll be eating them for at least 2 weeks going over the pass. When we start off, it's going to be in between 105 and 110 pounds each of us will be carrying. It is going to be hard going, very hard going. But of course we're only doing 10 miles a day, and 1.5 miles an hour for 8 hours, or 7 hours, is not hard going, even with 110 pounds in your back.
Stan Cribbett still had doubts.
Well, I was looking forward to it in a way because it was a challenge. That's one I'd never experienced before. But when actually I got the pack on my back and thought of the distance in front of me, I had a sort of funny sense of feeling, well, are you going to do it?
The army canoeists making little headway against the racing current. especially difficult for Stan Cribbett, who had only been in a two-man canoe once before. The film team watched their departure with misgivings. Ben Usher.
I think we ought to have all stayed together. If it meant hiring pack ponies to carry the heavy equipment, at least we would have all remained together and trekked over the Sifton Pass together. But Ben said, no, this is out of the question.
There are lots of other means of doing expeditions, but if you set out to do trans-navigation by water, then that's what you must do. You don't use ancillary means of transport.
So the second division of the expedition. Despite earlier promises of army transport, the film team was now faced either with carrying their own 100-pound survival packs, plus all camera equipment, or else flying on ahead, over the terrain the army team would soon be tackling. Reluctantly, the film team flew on by float plane to Fox Lake, while the soldiers struggled along the Davy Trail below. The plan was that as the explorers approached the highest point, the Sifton Pass, in 6 days' time, the film team would trek back 10 miles and rendezvous with them on the pass. But now, the film team were experiencing the sudden calm of Fox Lake for the first time. Yet even here they were not quite alone. On the far shore, a family of Indians were building a hunting cabin, a cabin that was to play an important part in the events to come. But now, Police Constable Usher's first chance to set up a decent, orderly campsite, instead of the usual rushed one-night affair. Meanwhile, Paul Berriff, cameraman turned radio operator, sent out his nightly check call. The film team, isolated save for their nightly radio check.
British Expedition, this is Bravo Charlie at Fox Lake. I'm not receiving anything on Channel 1. I'll go to Channel 2 and try you there, over.
Isolated despite their nightly radio check. For although they heard other stations, not one word came through from the Army expedition.
British Expedition from Bravo Charlie at Fox Lake, we're not receiving you. We've been trying to contact you for the last 5 nights. Still no joy. Are you now receiving, over?
Still on the 5th day, the film team set out on their 10-mile trek to the agreed rendezvous on the Sifton Pass. Set out apprehensively. But when they hit the Davy Trail, the trail the soldiers were meant to be coming along, their fears diminished. The Indians had told them pack horses had been over the whole trail that autumn, that it was clearly marked with new and old blazes and easy to follow. Trained soldiers with maps and compasses couldn't possibly lose it, and so all seemed well. The film team duly reached its rendezvous in the autumn woods that afternoon and waited. By 12 next day, the time it was agreed they should return to Fox Lake if no one had arrived, there was still no sign. They waited on till 6 p.m. Then, their food finished, they set off back, marching the last 2 hours in darkness and growing cold. That night, it froze hard for the first time, increasing their fears for the now overdue army team. Next morning, still nothing. But then news via the newly installed radio telephone in the Indians' cabin. 2 of the 4 soldiers were safe but injured. But that still left 2 missing, so the prearranged message was sent.
Prince George, this is Fox Lake. Tell Lady Fiennes, start search and rescue operation for 2 other missing members. 2 days Repeat, 2 days overdue at Fox Lake. Over.
Roger, I was just talking to Mrs. Fiennes on the telephone, and she says that the missing members have been located. The missing members have been located?
Relief and bewilderment, but the lake would supply the answers. The first man to be injured due to the huge packs, Corporal Joe Skibinski.
I turned in between 2 trees. It caught in one of the branches, and I just spun round. You know, the weight was just too much.
Yeah.
And when you fall, you just couldn't get up, like, you know.
Horrible taste in my mouth. You know, I didn't know what it was. I was a bit worried actually over it, you know.
The taste in Stan Cribbett's mouth was blood, coughed up because of the pressure of the straps on his chest. Both had been injured on the first days of the march and fallen back to an isolated hunting ranch to recover, while the other 2 pressed on. Then, only yesterday, Captain Fiennes and Trooper McConnell had staggered into the ranch exhausted. They said they had continued on up the Davy Trail after leaving Stan and Joe, but then they had swung off on the wrong side of the Forsberg Ridge. Realizing this, they retraced their steps, but failing to find the trail, they decided to try and push through behind the ridge. At Mount New, they were forced back by a snowstorm at 7,000 feet, and as food was running out, they made their way back to Terminus Mountain. Now, after 10 exhausting days in the bush, they had set out again on a second attempt. Worse, Jackie McConnell already had a badly injured ankle. Worse still, they had sent on their radio to save weight, and so had no means of calling for help. All the rescue team at Fox Lake could do was wait and hope. If Ran and Jackie did get through, then the 2 injured men wanted to do the next stage down the trail with them, if they were strong enough. So after a few more days' rest, Stan and Joe decided on a 1-hour fitness test with full packs. Incredibly, Stan promised that these packs were smaller than the ones they had set out with, which had also contained half a canoe each, and on occasions, the 14-pound radio. But as the fitness test progressed, the 2 started increasingly to relive that first day's trek. A moment of difference, though, when they met the Indians' hunting party. The Indians here limit their pack ponies' loads to 170 pounds. But Indians apart, growing similarities. Stan Cribbett's first pack.
It weighed between 110 and 115 pounds, which is only 18, 19 pounds lighter than what my actual body weight is, with having that weight on my back. It was pulling my chest open, but that's what it felt like. I was a bit worried about it.
I was first to be injured. I was at the rear of the party, and I got caught in between 2 low branches, and I swung my pack to try and get out between them, and the weight was just too much, and it twisted me around, and it twisted my back.
Again, the weight had suddenly taken charge, but no injury to Joe this time.
I had to make a engine trailer out of a couple of young trees, saplings and that, and then fit my cape across it and carry my kit on it like that, because I just couldn't bear the weight on my back. And it was very slow progress.
But even so, Joe decided to continue as he had on that first day. Stan, too, was recalling the past.
I'd gone about 5, 6 miles when I realised I was bringing up this blood from my chest, which I can only put down to the weight of the pack on my back. I think it was just congestion, really. because it's obvious that our breathing was restricted once you were pulling your shoulders back and chest back. And I think not being able to breathe normally, this is what actually caused it.
Joe on that first trek.
I dropped back about 2 miles at one point, and it took me a good hour to cover that 2 miles to catch up.
The end, failure.
Oh, that was a real sickening crunch, that, but there was just no use to us going on like stand spitting up blood in myself.
Ben Usher.
It was inevitable. It was inevitable that this sort of thing would happen. It was an impossible task.
In camp, deepening fears for the other 2 men somewhere out in the cold. The problem, how to find 2 exhausted soldiers, possibly anywhere in 1,000 square miles of sodden forest and without a radio. As soon as they could be anywhere near, search parties started going off up the trail. But it was from the lake that news at last came. On board, young Jackie McConnell, who had set out with a badly injured ankle.
I decided that not to take along the canoe, not the radio, because the radio was heavy as well. This time I actually weighed about 70 pounds. We started walking, the ankle kept on twitching against my boot, and I told Ran that it was sort of twitching again, and we just sort of kept walking. Yeah, we were going along, and I was biting my tongue to sort of take the pain away from the ankle and try and grit my teeth. But the pain got actually too worse. I just sort of collapsed at the side of the track, and I just sort of sat down and cried because I was annoyed at myself for not going any further.
Now, Captain Fiennes was attempting the crossing alone. But even though the scattered members were slowly regrouping, the repeated failures had made deep divisions in the group. And the leader, who gallantly goes it alone after losing all his men, can expect scant thanks from the men who, rightly or wrongly, believe he has failed them, especially as he now has a lighter pack than the ones they failed with. So it was when, alone and on schedule, Captain Fiennes arrived down the track. He had run out of food, lost the trail, been dropped in on by a friendly helicopter, but he had made it.
I think on any expedition, everyone has got to push part of the expedition through. Our expedition covered all the ground, maybe not all the people, but at least one of us covered all the ground.
But why only one? Failure breeds suspicion.
This is where I got the impressions, first of all, that he wanted to do it himself. He was dying to get rid of us.
He just couldn't wait to get rid of us. Well, if I get a chance, I'm going to spill the whole bloody lot.
And out of suspicion, anger.
Quite honestly, I've never seen such bad leadership in all my bloody life. I've seen better amongst a bunch of Boy Scouts.
I think it's very important that people should be basically loyal to the leader of the expedition. Because after all discomforts or disappointments can be laid basically at his door. He's therefore an obvious scapegoat, and even if unforeseen circumstances come up, there's a compulsive temptation of all the others to say, well, he bloody well ought to have foreseen them.
The basic criticism?
There was no need for it, because he could have had the boats flown up there and the radio and everything flown up, and we could have had comfortable maybe £50, £60 on our back and made it no bother.
The epitaph?
It wasn't proposed for one man to get through. The idea was for the expedition to go through. I think it was an empty victory.
Next morning, they hired an Indian girl to guide them over the last 30 miles of the trail to the river. A girl who had done the whole length of the trail many times and could not understand their earlier difficulties. Captain Fiennes said he had struggled through brush, waded up rivers, at last found the trail on the opposite side of the river to where it was meant to be. The guide said the trail was plain. Horses had been over it. You could follow it at night. You could follow it if you were blind. no one had ever got lost before. The trail, as seen through Indian and English eyes. Together, the last 30 miles took 24 hours. The previous 60 miles had taken 18 days and 3 men injured.